Haven Arrest Missionary Baptist Church presents Union Gospel Presses Sunday School Lesson number 6, Sunday, October 6, 2019. The lesson is entitled A Plague of Blood. Lesson text comes from Exodus chapter 7, verses 14 through 24. Related scriptures are Exodus 7, 1 through 13, 8, 1 through 32, and Revelation 16, 3 through 7. The place is Egypt. The time is 1445 BC. What is the Lord's chief goal in all his dealings with the universe he created? John Piper puts it succulently. The scriptures teach throughout that all the works of God have as their ultimate goal the display of God's glory. The Lord's desire to glorify himself is pointedly expressed throughout the Old Testament prophecies by the exclamation, "Know that I am the Lord." Exodus 6:7, 7:5, 17, 8:22, 14:4, 1 Kings 20:13, 28, Isaiah 49:23, Ezekiel 6:7, 10, 13, 14, Joel 3:17. In the case of our current lessons in Exodus, we have perhaps God's most dramatic display of his glory in his devastating judgments on Egypt and its gods, as well as in his power to deliver his people from their oppressors. Today's aim. Facts. To note that because Pharaoh would not let the Hebrews go, God struck all the waters of Egypt, turning them to blood. But Pharaoh's magicians also changed water to blood, so Pharaoh's heart was unmoved. Principle. To understand that the Lord is in the business of glorifying himself as the companion and defender of his covenant people. He allowed Pharaoh to further harden his heart against Moses so that his supreme judgment would continue to be displayed against Egypt and its gods. Application. To realize that no matter how daunting the opposition may appear to us, as God's covenant people in Christ, we can be confident in the Lord's power to defend us and bring victory on our behalf. Illustrating the lesson. Because of Pharaoh's hard-heartedness, the Lord brought a plague of blood upon Egypt's water supply, showing his supremacy over Egypt's preeminent god, Osiris. Practical points. 1. God controls your enemies and he prepares you to deal with them. Exodus 7:14. 2. When God sends you, he goes with you and directs your path. Verses 15 through 16. 3. God's actions are never subject to error or defeat. Verses 17 through 19. 4. When God moves on your behalf, your enemies can only stand and watch. Verse 20. 5. Defiance of God's word causes death and destruction. Verses 21 through 23. 6. Man cannot compensate for anything God has taken away. Verse 24. Golden text. Thus said the Lord, in this thou shalt know that I am the Lord. Behold, I will smite with the rod that is in mine hand upon the waters which are in the river, and they shall be turned to blood. Exodus 7:17. Today we have 3 lesson outlines. The first is announcement of the first plague, coming from Exodus 7:14 through 19. The second is enactment of the first plague, Exodus 7:20 through 21. And the third is response to the first plague, Exodus 7:22 through 24. Introduction. We look at the vast night sky filled with countless stars, and we agree with the psalmist David. The heavens declare the glory of God, Psalms 19:1. We look at a newborn baby and marvel at the miracle of birth and meditate on the obvious design of God in every person. The evidence for the existence of our eternal, all-powerful Creator is present in the creation that surrounds us. It is fully sufficient and undeniable, yet human beings have an amazing capacity for denying the undeniable. Millions of people look at the same sky we do and their own newborn children and still reject God's existence. The explanation of such denial, of course, is not a lack of evidence provided by God. It is fallen human nature which loves the darkness of sin and therefore refuses to come to the light of Christ. John 3:19 through 20. This was the challenge Moses faced. Pharaoh refused to believe in the Lord and obey him, even in the face of miraculous signs. Announcement of the plague. Announcement of the first plague. Exodus 7:14. And the Lord said unto Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hardened. He refuses to let the people go. 15. Get thee unto Pharaoh in the morning, lo, he goeth out unto the water, and thou shalt stand by the river's brink against he come, and the rod which was turned to a serpent shalt thou take in thine hand. Verse 16. And thou shalt say unto him, the Lord God of the Hebrews have sent me unto thee, saying, let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. And behold, hereunto thou wouldest not hear. Verse 17. Thou said the Lord, in this thou shalt know that I am the Lord. Behold, I will smite with the rod that is in mine hand upon the waters which are in the river, and they shall be turned to blood. Verse 18. And the fish that is in the river shall die, and the river shall stink, and the Egyptians shall loathe to drink the water of the river. Verse 19. And the Lord spake unto Moses, say unto Aaron, take thy rod, and stretch out thine hand upon the waters of Egypt, upon their streams, upon their rivers, and upon their ponds, and upon all their pools of water, that they may become blood, and that there may be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone. Necessity of the plague. Exodus 7:14 through 16. Moses' first meeting with Pharaoh had produced only greater burdens for the people of Israel. As a result, Moses' people were angry with him. 5:20 through 21. And Moses complained to the Lord that he had not yet delivered the people from their bondage. Verse 22 to 23. Moses did not realize it at the time, but that deliverance would not come quickly. This was because God wanted to do more than deliver his people. He also wanted to deliver a very clear message to Pharaoh, the Egyptians, and the world, namely that he alone is the Lord. The Lord proceeded to encourage Moses by reviewing his plan and his covenant promise to Israel. Exodus 6:1 through 5. He further assured Moses of freedom and blessing for the people. Verses 6 through 8. Still the Israelites would not listen to Moses. Verse 9. The Lord again charged Moses and Aaron to go to Pharaoh and demand Israel's release, even though he warned that the Egyptian monarch would not listen to them. Exodus 6:10 through 13. When they went before Pharaoh again, Aaron threw down his rod, and it miraculously transformed into a snake. When the king's magicians somehow seemed to duplicate the feat, Aaron's snake swallowed the others. The demonstration of the divine power did not seem to make an impression on Pharaoh, and he refused to listen to Moses and Aaron. 7:10 through 13. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Pharaoh's heart is hardened. He refuses to let the people go. Verse 14. While this must have seemed obvious to Moses, it was a reminder that the king's stubbornness was no surprise to God and that it would continue for some time. The statement also pointed to the necessity of the coming plagues. The 10 plagues God would send upon Egypt were designed to punish Egypt and bring about Israel's release. They would also strengthen the faith of the Israelites as they witnessed God's power and the fulfillment of his promise. A final and important purpose of the plague was to humiliate the gods of Egypt and totally discredit Egyptian religion. Exodus 12:12, Numbers 33:4. Each of the plagues directly challenged one or more of the Egyptian gods. The Lord ordered Moses and Aaron to confront Pharaoh again. They were to go to the brink of the river and wait for the king to come there. Aaron was to take with him the rod that had previously turned into a snake. The word for river used throughout this passage is of Egyptian origin and refers specifically to the Nile. Apparently, the king came there on a regular basis, Exodus 8:20, probably to perform some religious rite. Upon seeing the Pharaoh, Moses was to remind him of the Lord's demand that he release the Hebrews and that he had failed to do so to this point. Pharaoh was probably becoming rather annoyed with Moses and Aaron by now, but the two were about to add something new to the ongoing struggle, a plague that would devastate the land and affect all of Pharaoh's people. Nature of the plague, Exodus 7:17 through 19. The words the Lord gave Moses to speak to the Egyptian king reveal both the purpose and the nature of this first plague. First, the plague was designed to make the Pharaoh know that the God of Israel is the Lord. It was meant as an answer to the king's earlier question, who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice, 5:2. He was about to discover something of God and his power. Second, the words reveal the form of the coming plague. Aaron's rod would be used to strike the water and the river would be turned to blood. As a result, the fish in the river would die, the river would stink, and the water would be unfit for drinking. This plague would be especially noteworthy due to its corruption of the Nile River. It is hard to overstate the Egyptians' dependence on this great river. It was crucial to them for transportation, commerce, and agriculture. Without the annual flooding of the river, Egypt would be as desolate as the deserts on either side. The Egyptians fully recognized this fact, and in thanksgiving for the blessings of the Nile, hymns were written. Not only were gods associated with the Nile, but fertility, blessing, and happiness were also associated with the faithfulness of this river. The divine pollution of the Nile would create tremendous hardship for the Egyptians, if only for a short time, and it would be a testimony to the power of the Lord. It would also strike a blow at Egypt's religion. The Nile itself was worshipped as sacred. In addition, Apis was the god of Nile, and Isis was the goddess of the river. Osiris was another god closely associated with the Nile. The turning of the river to blood would demonstrate how powerless these false deities were, for they would be unable to reverse the plague or give relief to the Egyptians. The Nile, the source of life for Egypt, would be turned into a source of death. Exodus 7:20 takes us forward in the narrative to the moment of confrontation between Moses and Aaron and the Pharaoh of Egypt. At the Lord's instruction, Moses told Aaron to stretch out his rod and strike the waters of Egypt. Here our understanding of the nature of this plague is expanded. For not only was the Nile River affected, but so also were the streams, rivers, ponds, and pools of water in the land. The water in all these places became blood. In addition, water stored in wood buckets and stone jars also turned to blood. It is likely most, if not all, of the water mentioned here ultimately came from the Nile. The streams, verse 19, were probably branches off the main river. The rivers were irrigation channels, and ponds can refer to marsh areas or pools of standing water. The pools consisted of water collected in cisterns or reservoirs. All such water was turned to blood throughout all the land of Egypt. Enactment of the first plague, verse 20. And Moses and Aaron did so, and as the Lord commanded. He lifted up the rod and smote the waters that were in the river in the sight of Pharaoh, and in the sight of his servants, and all the waters that were in the river were turned to blood. Verse 21. And the fish that was in the river died, and the river stank, and the Egyptians could not drink of the water of the river, and there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. Moses and Aaron did exactly as the Lord commanded. Upon meeting the Pharaoh, Aaron struck the Nile with his rod, and the river immediately turned to blood. The fact that he did this in front of Pharaoh and his servants left no doubt as to the agent of this miracle. It was clearly not a natural occurrence, but a work of God of Israel. As foretold by the Lord, the fish in the river died, the Nile became putrid, and the water was unusable. In addition, the water throughout the land turned to blood. The physical impact would have been immediate since water is essential to life. The spiritual impact likewise would have been sufficient, as the Egyptian people fruitlessly implored the gods of the Nile, the gods of the various fish, and the crocodile god for help and relief. A number of questions are often raised in regard to the plague of blood. Perhaps foremost is whether the waters turn into actual blood. Many commentators suggest the word blood is used here simply of the color of the water and point to the prophecy in Joel 2:31 of the moon turning into blood. There, the blood clearly seems to be a reference to the mere appearance of the moon as red. A simple discoloring of the water by some natural means, however, would not account for the immediate change upon Aaron's rod touching it. Neither would explain the extensiveness of the death to the fish. Though the chemical makeup of the red substance is unknown, to the Egyptians it looked and tasted like blood and was probably described as such. It also had the effects we would expect if it were genuine blood. The question raises another one. Did God use naturally occurring events to bring about the plagues? Some writers have gone to great lengths to explain the plagues in natural terms. A volcanic eruption polluted the Nile and turned it red. Frogs were forced from their natural habitat and died on dry land. The death of the frogs attracted gnats and flies, and on it goes. While God can and does use natural creations, sometimes in amazing ways, to accomplish his purposes, the plagues can be explained only by supernatural intervention. This is certainly true if, as suggested, the blood was by all appearances real blood. The timing, the element of prediction, and the growing intensity of the plagues also point clearly to miraculous works of God, not natural event Moses somehow exploited to the benefit of Israel. Another question is, did the Israelites suffer the results of the plague as well? Nothing is said about their being exempt from it, so perhaps it was God's way of reminding them of the Lord's power and assuring them that he was perfectly capable of effecting their release. Also, half of the 10 plagues are explicitly said to have made a distinction between the Egyptians and the Israelites. Exodus 8:22-23, 9:3-4, 25-26, 10:22-23, 12:23, and 27, thus protecting the latter from their devastating effects. So it is quite possible there was such a distinction made in all 10 plagues. The very fact that there was any distinction, of course, argues that the plagues were undeniably miraculous, not natural. Response to the first plague, verse 22. And the magicians of Egypt did so with their enchantments, and Pharaoh's heart was hardened, neither did he hearken unto them as the Lord had said. Verse 23. And Pharaoh turned and went into his house, neither did he set his heart to this also. Verse 24. And all the Egyptians digged round about the river for water to drink, for they could not drink of the water of the river. The magician's response, Exodus 7:22a. Probably at Pharaoh's request, his magicians were able to counterfeit the miracle of Moses and Aaron to the degree that Pharaoh was satisfied. In light of the panoramic pride, it probably would not take very much to satisfy the wicked heart of this man. This was probably a matter of simple trickery, though it is possible they could have performed the act by means of demonic power. As one writer aptly noted, however, one would have thought to reverse the effects would have been more helpful, but doubtless they lay beyond their powers. We might wonder where they got the water to perform their trick if all the water had turned to blood. The answer is probably to be found in Exodus 7:24. Underground water apparently was the one source unaffected by the plague. The Pharaoh's response, Exodus 7:22b through 23. Pharaoh's heart was hardened so that he would not listen to the Lord's demand to release the Israelites. He was resolute, and he turned and went into the house. The expression, neither did he set his heart to this, simply means he did not take to heart the meaning of this plague. He seemed unconcerned. Indeed, as Pharaoh, he would be spared much of the suffering his people endured because he could probably obtain the necessary resources to find usable water for himself. The people's response, Exodus 7:24. Finally, we get a glimpse of how the common people of Egypt responded to the plague of blood. All the Egyptians dug near the river desperately looking for water to drink. It seems that underground water was not polluted, but it required considerable effort to obtain it. Exodus 7:25 seems to indicate the plague of blood lasted 7 days. Most people cannot survive much longer than a week without water. The Egyptians were certainly tested by this plague and would have done whatever was necessary to obtain the needed water, including digging new wells. Pharaoh was adamantly opposed to Moses. His pride would not allow him to acknowledge the Lord and his authority, even when he witnessed a miracle that directly insulted his own gods and brought suffering to his people. We must acknowledge that we can never overcome another's opposition to God by either physical or intellectual means. We can only do what we are called to do: be patient, faithful, witness to the truth of God, and allow him to do his work in his way and in his time. And like Moses, we can trust God to use our feeble efforts in his plan. The river of blood was just a first step in the Lord's plan to direct Pharaoh's heart. Questions. 1. What message did God want to deliver to Pharaoh and the Egyptian people? 2. What purposes were the plagues designed to accomplish? 3. At what river were Moses and Aaron to meet Pharaoh? 4. What significance did the river have to the Egyptians? 5. How would the miraculous pollution of the river strike a blow at Egypt's religion? 6. Besides the river, what other God sources were turned to blood? What other water sources were turned to blood? 7. What resulted from this first plague on Egypt? 8. What was the water turned into actual blood? Explain. 9. Can the turning of water into blood be explained naturally? 10. How did Pharaoh respond to the plague? This concludes the Sunday School lesson for Sunday, October 6, 2019. Thank you for listening. God bless.